roll call, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank
Good
you.
morning. Chair Mashburn.
Here.
Vice Chair Matsumoto.
She is on her way, running a few minutes late.
Supervisor Hume.
Here.
Supervisor Ding. Supervisor Provenza.
Here.
Board Member
Did you hear me?
We did.
Yes.
We did, Jim. Yes, sir.
Oh. Thank you.
Dang is. Board Member Winternitz.
Here.
And that will do it. We have one.
Supervisor Burgess is here.
Not that I don't love you guys.
And you know how to say my name, I really appreciate it.
I already have you wrote us here. I skipped it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 here. It's a quorum.
All right, thank you, ma'am. That brings us to public comment. Do we have any public comment from anybody? Anything? Not on the agenda before the board for regular business today.
No public comment from online.
Great, and none in the room. That brings us to the consent calendar. Anybody want to comment on the consent calendar, or anybody online have anything on the consent calendar that they like pulled or they would like to discuss? Taking hands going up there either. All right,
I'll make a motion to move the consent.
thank you, Matt. Can I get a second?
Who made the motion?
We're good.
Oh, you're here. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Is that a second?
It was,
yes.
So I have a motion and a second. Can I get a roll call vote, ma'am? We have,
Absolutely. So I have Burgess on the motion and Hume on the second. Chair Mashburn,
aye.
Vice Chair Matsumoto, absent. Supervisor Hume.
Here. I mean, yes.
You're gonna get me all day. Supervisor Burgess.
I'm here too.
Supervisor Ding. Supervisor Provenza.
Yes.
Board Member Peralt. Board Member Martin. Board Member Dang is absent, and Board Member Winton.
Yes.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 motion carries.
Thank you, ma'am. That brings us to our executive officer's report.
Okay, good morning. First, I want to introduce Wyatt. Wyatt is with the Regional Park District. He's just going to welcome us and say a few quick
Yeah.
words.
Thank you. So for those of you that are here and those of you who are joining us online, thank you for coming to Big Break Visitor Center at the Delta. We are one of 73 East Bay Regional Park District parks throughout Contra Costa and Alameda County, directly serving the 3 million residents that live in these areas, as well as many more around the Bay Area and beyond who use our parks. Just a quick little bit of housekeeping for those of you that are here in person. If at any point you need to use the restroom, stretch your legs, get water, it's just through our exhibit center to the left of the front desk. And then there's coffee and tea in the corner, so please feel free to do that. If you need anything throughout the meeting, just come find one of us who looks like this. And yeah, we're really happy you're here. I'll also be leading a little tour outside around the park afterwards. So if you're able to stick around, come join. And we'll learn a bunch of stuff about Big Break, talk about the Delta, and a little bit of the history of the space. So yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Wyatt. Thank you for the coffee. And
Yeah.
I just want to mention that Wyatt is a recent graduate of the Delta Protection Commission's Delta Leaders Program.
Hey.
Yeah. Let y'all know about why.
Okay, so launching into the executive officer's report, it's actually on page 8 of your packet. Welcome, thanks for being here. It's always great when we get to board meetings outside Sacramento or West Sacramento, where we typically do, and to have site visits. It's just a wonderful connection to really get grounded in the things that we do and why we do them. A little off script here, I wanted to mention that yesterday we got to Martha and Maya and I went down and we participated in the San Joaquin Foundation's celebration of the $2.5 million grant that we provided to the last board meeting for the planning for the planning for the Stockton Aquatic Center. And it was such an amazing event. I mean, we all know the value of that project. We approved that project. We were excited to approve that project. But speaker after speaker after speaker talked about the significance of that project to the community, the disadvantaged people in the community, disabled people in the community, and what it'll bring to the community and how that project came about. There were tears, there were wet eyes throughout the crowd. So it was just a great reminder of the importance and significance of the work that we all do as a board, as staff, to bring real value to these communities. So it's just a great day. So I thought I would share that. Yes.
I forgot to welcome the liaison advisors.
Oh, please.
I know I see Marge here for presentation. And was there any liaison advisors in the online community?
All right, so just a few more housekeeping issues. Just typically, we do our Stewardship Council, Delta Protection Commission, our updates for the conveyance program and eco restore. We're going to forego that today because we're down here. It was a lot to ask them to travel, and we'll pick that back up in July. So moving on to staff updates. Some of you may have heard that our new Deputy Executive Officer, Karen Burr, has been appointed as the interim executive officer of the San Joaquin River Conservancy. This was at the request of the Resources Agency. She's really fantastic. And so she is on a 4-month assignment. It's a great opportunity for her. I think it's a good opportunity for the Conservancy as well. We've been assured it's 4 months. She grew up down in Fresno, and she's assured us that she doesn't want to go back to Fresno. So I don't fear that we're going to lose her. But it is a great opportunity for her. And she is actually putting about 1 day a week on average with us as well. So split. Also want to welcome Alexandria Valencia. She's our new administrative assistant. She goes by Alex, and she started with us on the 14th. So she's just been with us a month today. She's doing great. She's coming to us from a variety of positions in the private sector. And then we just, in the interim between printing this packet, we have final offer and acceptance from our new Associate Government Program Analyst, who will backfill Jessica as our new board liaison. So her name is, I lost it on my notes, Jenny Howe, and she's going to start on June 14th. And as board members, she would be the one that you probably will interact with. You'll see emails coming from her regularly. Okay, moving on to program updates. The Delta Drought Response Program continues. Basically, we've shifted from completing the grantscape. Second set of invoices has come in. Invoices at the Conservancy all come in at one time, and it is a Herculean effort by staff to process all the invoices and be very careful with attention to detail and make sure that that meets standards as well as meets timelines. And so, great effort for staff to get that done. There is an oversight committee for the drought response program, and it had its first meeting on May 4th. And that's the group that will continue to analyze all the data and help us all understand the efficacy of the practices that these farmers are employing to save water. And they will provide a report, much like the report that we provided for the first year at the last board meeting at the end of this, probably towards the end of this calendar year. I want to talk a little bit about the fiscal year 2023-24 budget. The Governor's May revise came out just a few weeks ago. Pretty much what we expected. We were very happy that given the budget shortfall or the deficit, that we were able to maintain all of our baseline funding for staff and operations. We were also able to maintain all of our nature-based nature-based solutions funding and climate access and resource management funding for this current year, which is $42 million. You may recall that there was a little over 13 million identified in last year's budget that was to be appropriated in this year's budget. There was a pot of 6 million for nature-based solutions and a pot of 7 million for wildfire and forest resilience activities. The 6 million for nature-based solutions was not in the governor's revise. We sort of expected that, and the 7 million for wildfire is in that. So we'll be tracking this very carefully. If that budget moves forward as proposed, we will be looking for fire prevention activities in the Delta and the near Delta area and helping design programs to help with that. The governor also mentioned that he wanted to offset some of the money that was being pulled back in the budget with a bond. And so there's discussions about
And I just
bonds.
saw the email.
You feel comfortable saying a few things?
Somebody online? So there will be likely bond discussions moving forward. One of the things that we have done agencies within the Delta to think 5 to 10 years in the future and think about the projects that are on the horizon and what those projects, the ballpark magnitude of what those projects might need in funding in that time period. And our expectation is that we will put together that list and provide it to the Secretary for Natural Resources just to help inform those bond discussions. So there's a good sense of what funding is needed in the Delta in the near term. Please stop me at any time if you have questions. Bagley-Keene Open Medium Requirement Act exemptions will expire on July 1. So if you recall, we've been able to do these remote meetings during COVID. There was an extension, but as of July 1, so for our July board meeting, we go back to the old model. Not much different if we can still do hybrid meetings, but if board members are interested in participating virtually, they will need to provide us with the address where they will be that we can post on the agenda. That has to happen business days before the meeting. And then that location has to be publicly accessible. So if you need to do it in your conference room in your office, that's perfectly acceptable. I think you could do it at a public location, a coffee shop. You may not want to do it at home at your dining room table, but I think we still have the ability to continue to do virtual meetings. Just make sure we're that constraint. So moving on to nutria eradication, you have our standard little update in the packet. Because as we know, we've had nutria sightings in the Delta. Going back to 2018, there were a few animals taken in Wallfowl Slough, which is immediately adjacent to the Delta. And then both in 2019 and 2021, there were individual animals detected on camera in the Rough and Ready Island area, kind of the southeast portion of the Delta. And then really nothing until October 22, which was sort of the big scare where we saw a family group of them on Sherman Island. 8 nutria were removed at that time from Sherman Island. High flows we're experiencing now. High flows help nutria disperse downstream. The rapid response team has shifted almost all of their effort into the near Delta and the Delta to really step up activity. That included this month starting the test or the trials with the nutria smell sniffing dogs. These dogs are highly trained. They're actually coming from the Chesapeake Bay, so they're doing trials to see if these dog teams would be effective. The dog teams did detect scat on Sherman Island and the presence of at least 1 additional nutria. They've removed 3 additional nutria just recently. So they're still here. They're still in the Delta. They're still a concern. I think the bright spot here is that we're seeing a pretty significant decline in population. So if you look at all the nutria taken through time, of course, there were just a few to begin with. It really peaked in 2020 when they took 1,300 nutria out of the system. Last year, they took 580, so a pretty significant decline. And then this year, almost halfway through, they've only taken 88. So again, population is going down, level of effort is going up. So I think by and large, it's a pretty positive circumstance. Getting close, folks. Moving on to Delta Science. I won't go into too much detail. We continue all of our science coordination efforts. Wanted to mention that the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee met right here in this very room a couple months ago. For those of you that are new or don't know, that is the 18 or 19 agencies that are actively engaged in implementing the Delta Plan. They meet twice a year. They met here and also then did a tour of Dutch Slough nearby. And they focused quite a bit on the restoration subcommittee, which we've talked quite a bit about, and the work plan of the restoration subcommittee, the green tape initiative to really try to speed up processes. And we're going to talk more about some of those processes later on in the agenda. The Conservancy staff with the Delta Stewardship Council then organized a tour of the South Delta to really look at a suite of potential projects down in the South Delta. And those Also, we'll be sort of, we're thinking about the cost for those and trying to make sure there's funding for those moving into the future. The Delta Invasive Species Coordination Team met in May, and they also met with the statewide California Invasive Species Advisory Committee. And that committee, they helped that committee, the statewide committee, understand what's going on in the Delta and what our role in coordinating and potential needs for future issues in the Delta. Media mentions you'll see listed. There were 5 or 6, which is a nice uptick for us. It's nice to see us getting press for all the great work that we're doing. I won't go through those, but they're listed there and you can track them down if you're interested. And then the last thing I'm going to cover is board directives from the March meeting. There was just one, and that was a request to have more visual presentation of Delta Conservancy projects, particularly projects that have been completed. Hopefully you noticed in the packet for both the ERICA program and the community program that there is a project highlighted at the end. One is a near completed project, the other is a completed project. But this is something we definitely want to do. I think we're fully staffed now. I meant to mention that. Hope is our communications person. So we're really going to start sort of stepping up our game in highlighting final projects, getting nice pieces out that show the progress. So that will conclude the program update. I'm going to turn it over to Jessica for the budget update unless there's any questions.
This one, nutria.
Yes.
Is the goal with the nutria control and like minimization, or is there a chance that we can get rid of them?
It's a really good, and I think with most invasive species, the goal is almost always control, particularly after it gets to this inflection point that where the population gets established. But I think the numbers are encouraging enough that it almost appears that we might be able to eradicate them. That's, probably a little optimistic. Leo's shaking his head. It might be here forever, but probably in very low numbers that are much easier to control.
And can you remind me how they got here?
Nobody knows for sure. They were probably introduced by human activity.
Like pet?
Somebody probably brought one over from somewhere. I don't know.
Look, at least 2. I'm
Yeah.
not a biologist.
One that was pregnant.
Oh, that's true.
Oh, it was.
Originally, yeah, and then they thought they'd gotten rid of them and that there might have been like a remnant population. We don't know exactly how they came back, but that's how they were here originally.
Oh, like a while
through the
ago.
fur trade, yeah, and so then the reintroduction could have been from nearby or something like that.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife has a cookbook that you can get. Dress them.
Great, thank you. Christmas present,
They're not-
everybody.
Tastes like chicken.
All right, Jessica, please.
Oh, sorry, Campbell, Jim has his hand raised.
Oh, Jim.
Oh, yes, thank you. On the nutria, I think we've done a tremendous job on the eradication, but I'm concerned in terms of going forward. Do we have sustainable funding over the years? Because it seems like we could declare a victory and then have one turn up and multiply if there isn't funding going forward, probably for a decade or more.
Yeah, it's a really important point and a concern. So, we've put, I believe, close to $9 million in Proposition 1 funding to the effort to control nutria. That's one-time funding and a one-time grant. Once that's been expended, it's done. So certainly they could come back to us in the future if we have available funds and apply for additional funding. The statewide invasive species group has access to $5 million annually now that group prioritizes but that's statewide. So that might be funding that might be available for a slightly smaller program to maintain, not have such a strong push to eradicate, but then maintain populations in the future. But it is certainly uncertain what the future funding would be for that.
But we want to just keep that in mind, I think, as we go forward, because it's so much of a risk that once we declare victory, there's one left somewhere, and the whole thing multiplies before we are able to gather up the funds to address it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just a comment. I think that's a real important comment. correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the bulk of Department of Fish and Wildlife's funding for newt eradication came from the Delta Conservancy. That's right. Well, that's what they're really depending on. And Sandy, onto your question, could we eradicate them? I doubt it, and I'm willing to bet on that. And one of the main reasons is just their high fecundity. They just multiply so quickly. They have so many, a lot of litter. So it doesn't take very much for them to stay there. The Department of Fish and Wildlife had a program where they sterilized the male and introduced it into a colony. I forget what they call that, the
The
Judas.
Judas nutria.
Yeah, that's good. They still, is that still?
You know, that's really fascinating. The challenge has been that the male nutria don't survive after the surgery.
Oh,
And they've done necropsy on them, and what they find is they have all kinds of strange lesions on their liver. So there's something in the local environment that is really negatively affecting the population. It's helping us with the eradication. So the Judas nutria that they were putting out there were almost all dying rapidly after the surgery. So it's just, you know, one last stress on an already stressed
Okay.
biology. So
to Jim's point, I think it would behoove us to think about continued funding for long-term nutria management.
absolutely.
I'm interested in the dogs program that's on here and how is this a very new approach, or has this been something that's been proven in certain areas?
It's certainly new here because it's, you know, they actually brought them over from Chesapeake Bay. Where They're
Okay.
pretty active. Chesapeake Bay has been decimated by these.
Right.
Really big challenges. And so it's to test whether they work here. I don't know how long they've been active on the East Coast, but certainly something we could ask them to come in and give a presentation on that at our next board meeting.
I think it's really an interesting approach.
Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but, this week they've detected 2 nutrients
In Sassoon.
on photo stations. So they're starting to mobilize this week. There's emergency protection west of
Yeah.
Sherman Island.
And I think that probably is, you know, kind of a function of the high water. There's so much water pushing them downstream.
So
Yeah.
there's been monitoring. I hadn't detected them until just, I heard last night.
So, question, is that a local effort or is that on the state level, and how do they know where to put the cameras and look for them?
So it is a statewide effort. Mostly the bulk of the population has been further up the San Joaquin system.
Right,
And we made the
until
decision.
now, dun, dun,
Right.
dun.
And the board made the decision to go ahead and fund that effort outside the Delta, recognizing how important it is to keep them out of the Delta. And so now, basically, they're pretty mobile. Once they have a hit like that, they will mobilize all their camera detection and their trapping to that location. So they pretty much are surveying all the time and then hearing when they get reports. And then the interesting thing is these look a lot like muskrats and look a lot like beavers, so they get calls all the time that are false hits.
So raising awareness locally is helpful, even though there's a lot more reports because of the.
Yeah, it's helpful, and we actually had a little pocket pamphlet that we might still have some copies of that we should bring and distribute.
Yeah, it seems like it's been only a few years since really there was a lot of awareness brought to it here in Contra Costa County, so.
Probably time to step
Yeah.
backwards again. Okay. Any other questions?
So speaking with the city of Pittsburgh, we have a lot of, marine recreators, we've got duck hunters, we've got, kite boarders, you were saying Sherman Island. Is there a message you want us to give to our recreators if they see a nutria, other than call? I mean.
Absolutely. I don't know the number offhand. Do you, Rachel?
I don't know the number, but there's like, if you were to look on the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's website, they have a reporting line that you can call. So yeah, like sharing that number, I think would be great. Maybe we can get more of those pamphlets and bring them to the next board meeting for folks to distribute.
Yeah.
And there might even be a PDF of it on the CFW's webpage.
Yeah.
That you could print off.
Yeah, at our marina, we have 3 sheds essentially, that only duck hunters lease out. And so getting that message to all of them at once, I mean, come November, late November, they're all gonna hear it.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, we'd love to post that
And
information.
it has a lot of pictures on it. It really helps with identification because they are easy to confuse, but it does.
Yeah,
does a
all
good
these
job.
guys are,
Yeah,
making sure people understand them, so.
Yeah, it'd be helpful. I don't know about Monmouth County, but I know Contra Costa County would like to lean in on that.
We'll
And
get
our
information now.
I'm putting the
Noted.
link in the meeting chat too.
Russ, Ryan.
Yeah, they also on the webpage have a map that shows where all the detections are. That's a very useful thing to know where they're at, where they're being located.
All right, Jessica, I think you're up for budget now.
I'm Jessica Adel, I'm Administration Supervisor for the Conservancy. We have a, attachment, 5.2 is the Sacramento-San Delta Conservancy Budget and Expenditure Report. It's for our third quarter, so it goes through March 31st of 2023. We're moving along. Again, typically you'll they're at 72%. And also facilities operation are typically at 74% now. All of our other expenses are coming in slowly. Noted on line 24, grants and subventions, we have started to, as Campbell said, with the Delta drought response, has submitted invoices. We have 2 sets of invoices that have been submitted, some in April after this report. So the program is moving along. And I think the last set of invoices come in August or October. So that program a lot of that will be done at that point. Do you have any questions? Okay, thanks.
All right, I think that concludes what I think might have been the longest executive officer report in the history of the organization.
All right, which brings us to the Ecosystem Restoration Climate Adaption Grant Program update.
Morning, everyone, board members. I'm Angie Shaka. I'm an environmental scientist here at the Delta Conservancy. Today I'll be presenting agenda item number 6, the Ecosystem Restoration and Climate Adaptation, or ERICA program update. If you're following along, this can be found on page 13 of your report. So to start off with an update on active ERICA projects, we've executed 3 new grant agreements since the last board meeting. All of which were a part of the Proposition 1 Cycle 5 solicitation. Those are the Little Franks Phase 2 of the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area Habitat and Drainage Improvement Project, and the Improving Hydrological Resiliency of Mammoth Wetlands in the Sassoon Marsh Project. And other active ERICA projects can be found on page 14. So I'd like to highlight a few selected project updates there. On page 19, for those of you following along, the Knightson Wetland Restoration and Flood Protection Planning Project. From the California Department of Fish and Wildlife at the end of March. So that's notable because it was the first project in the Delta to receive such a concurrence. And it indicates that cutting the green tape initiatives are being implemented locally to keep much needed projects moving forward. Moving on, page 20, we have the Stone Lakes Restoration Planning Project. The grantee, Ducks Unlimited, is in the process of seeking out implementation funds and has recently worked with Conservancy staff to submit a concept proposal to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's 2023 America's Beautiful Challenge. So the Conservancy is now waiting on an invitation to submit a full proposal in hopes of obtaining funding for future implementation of this project and possibly other projects as well. Moving on to amendment requests. Since the last board meeting, we've had 4. 3 of those were requests to extend the funding term for projects. Those were all approved internally with the Conservancy. The 4th request is for project ID P12208, the Ulatis Creek habitat restoration projects. The awardee is requesting a pre-execution amendment to increase the project budget. This is going to be discussed in detail during the next agenda item, so stay tuned for that. Next, moving on to our working proposals. Those are listed on the bottom of page 21. The Delta Conservancy has received full proposals from potential nature-based solutions wetland restoration projects. So the first, NBS 01, which is a wetland mosaic landscape on Webb Tract, is proposed by the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and will be presented for your consideration later today in agenda item 10. We've also received two other proposals. One is from the Nature Conservancy that would convert 426 acres of existing agricultural land on Staten Island. And that would be to totally viticulture, but it would also work with private landowners throughout the Delta to convert up to 5,000 acres to rice culture. The other proposal we've received is from the John Muir Land Trust. That's involving the purchase and planning of a 600-acre project on Bethel Island. So we anticipate bringing those two projects to you at a later board meeting. All right, so moving on to closed projects. All Proposition 1, Cycle 1 and 2 projects have fully closed at this point. In response to a board directive, as Kimball mentioned earlier, we'll be highlighting recently closed projects of different project outcomes. So we look forward to providing those into the future as projects close. On page 22, you'll see there are before and after project photos of the recently closed wildlife corridors for flood escape on the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area. So this project created approximately 5 miles of new habitat that provides an escape corridor for wildlife during flood events. And outside of flood events and outside of flood season, it provides habitat and food resources. A second goal of this project was to increase community engagement in habitat restoration and to educate the public on restoration projects in the Delta. And the grantee successfully created a half-acre publicly accessible demonstration planting area. And they also held restoration events for the public that resulted in over 1,800 hours of hands-on restoration experience for the community and high school students, et cetera. So if you're interested in the full final report for that project or others, my contact information is at the end of the agenda item. I'd be happy to provide those. Lastly, I just wanted to mention that following today's business meeting, we'll be meeting to visit 2 ERICA program project sites. We're already here at the first one at Big Break for the Big Break Regional Shoreline Restoration and Public Access Planning Project. That's CAR 03. So please stick around for that. And following that, we'll make a quick 10-minute drive over to the Proposition 1 funded Oakley Creekside Park Restoration Project. So with that, thanks for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions online? Anybody? Thank you, ma'am. And that brings up the consideration of amendment to the budget of the Ecosystem Restoration and Climate Adaption Grant Program Agreement for Ulatis Creek Habitat Restoration Project. You're on, Doc. Thank you.
Good morning, board members. My name is Trevor Fox, and I'm an environmental scientist here at the Delta Conservancy. Today, I'll be presenting agenda item number 7.1, which is a request for consideration of amendment to the Ulatis Creek Habitat and Restoration Project. The staff report for this amendment can be found on page 31 of your board packet. Just the background, this project was originally awarded during our Prop 1 funding cycle in October of last year. And the total amount of that award was $359,639. The objective of this implementation project is to restore historic riparian habitat on working lands in the Delta. The project will focus on installing native plants along the Ulatis Creek, including bushes, trees, and grasses, generating habitat for a number of species, including migratory birds. When the grantees submitted their proposal for the Ulatis Creek project, they utilized the budget that used then current salary and benefit schedules, as well as supply estimates. These numbers were then multiplied by an inflationary adjustment estimate for the 3-year grant period. Their inflationary adjusted estimates were based on the previous decade's inflation index, which ranged from 0% to 3.6% between years 2010 and 2020. This is a standard practice for Solano County RCD, and they have used this for many years when preparing grant applications. And it's also in line with the methods used by other agencies. Approval of this amendment will allow the awardee to complete the project implementation as proposed in the awardee project. However, if additional Conservancy funding is not approved, the awardee will need to delay the project to find other funds, if possible at all. This has the potential to create a risk for the project implementation, and the implementation could be delayed or deferred while sufficient funding is secured. The Conservancy staff believes that the approval of this amendment would not fundamentally change the merit of the project, as it was when evaluated in the competitive review process. The staff recommends that the board approve the report. And at this time, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Anybody online? No hand.
I might just add that we ought to get used to this. This is inflation is hitting every one of the projects, every one of the grants that we have. So we're going to be seeing more of this in the future for sure.
A question, do we have any concerns that, I mean, obviously inflation is hitting, more people are coming, that we actually are going to have the funding to be able to approve those future requests for increase? I'm careful about any precedent we're setting, and have we done this recently? For anyone else?
We have awarded, I think, 1 or 2 additional cost increases as a result of inflationary costs. Certainly, you know, the available future funding is problematic. I think it essentially has to be first come, first serve. And Proposition 1 is a really tricky one because we have some big projects that, you know, whether or not they ultimately move forward could bring money back into the coffer. So it's really hard to know, but it is a concern for sure.
Sarah Lesmeister, the Ecological Programs Manager at the Adult Conservancy. We have reached out to our grantees to let them know that we're running into this. The Proposition 1 funds are, dwindling for us. And if they have anything that is at risk of the projects failing, please let us know as soon as possible, so we can try to work with them and the other projects and be as equitable as possible to, give a budget increases if necessary.
Glad you're being proactive about that.
Unless you know other questions, and this is an action item, I would entertain the motion.
Trevor, do you want to read the motion?
Yeah, I have some suggested motion language here. Move that the board approve a pre-execution amendment to the grant agreement with Solano County Resource Conservation District for project ID P1-2208 to award an additional $53,947 in project funding.
What Trevor said.
There's a motion. Do I get a second?
Sir.
I got a second. Oh, 2 seconds. Got 1 second. All right.
I'll take Sandy, Vice Chair Matsumoto. As a second. Okay, let's do a roll call. Chair Mashburn,
Aye.
Vice Chair Matsumoto,
Yes.
Supervisor Hume,
Hi.
Supervisor Burgess,
Yes,
Burgess,
yes, that too.
Supervisor Ding, Supervisor Provenza,
Yes.
Board Member Pearl.
Aye.
Board Member Martin.
Yes.
Board Member Udang is absent, and Board Member Winternet.
Yes.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ayes. The motion carries.
All right, thank you.
At this time, I'd like to invite Elizabeth Davis from the Solano County RCD to say a few words. She's joining us virtually today.
I just wanted to thank the board for providing this funding and this opportunity to restore habitat in the heart of the Delta. We're looking forward to implementing this project and working with a small farmer in the region. Thank you.
All right, I think that wraps that one up. We're at now, Community Enhancement Grant Program update.
Hey, good morning.
My name is Maya Garrett, and I'm the Conservancy's Ecological and Community Program Analyst. I'm here to present agenda item 8, the Community Enhancement Grant Program Update, which is on page 33 of your agenda packet. The Community Enhancement Program, or CEP, is funded through a $12 million allocation for Proposition 68, the California Drought, Water, Parks, Climate, Coastal Protection, and Outdoor Access for All Act of 2018, and 2 general fund allocations of Climate Access and Resource or CAR funds totaling $11.4 million. The program funds projects related to recreation and tourism, historic and cultural preservation, environmental education, and community access. The program accepts proposals on an ongoing basis and is actively seeking proposals for the open solicitation. We are also aware of several potential projects currently working on their proposals. Currently, there is $4.8 million available in Proposition 68 funding and $4.02 million available in CAR funds. However, we are recommending for consideration today awarding $3.5 million in CAR funds. This report highlights projects funded through the CEP. I'm happy to report that we have 10 executed grants and 1 awarded grant. The projects are detailed on pages 34 through 37 of the agenda packet. But to provide a few highlights of what we've been working on, CEP staff conducted 3 Prop 68 site visits in Isleton this month and attended an event and site visit for the Delta Aquatic Center of Stockton yesterday. The Clarksburg Schoolhouse acquisition project is near complete and will close in the coming months. Similarly to the ERISA report, we highlighted a nearly complete project in Isleton, the Isleton Museum in the Bing Kong Kong building, which purchased museum quality display cases for the museum. In addition to these projects, we have 1 proposal, which will be presented today, agenda item 9.1, the Central Harbor Park and Boat Launch Facility Upgrade Implementation Project. Details about the proposal can be found on page 43 of your agenda packet. Thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, I'll take them now.
Any hands going up online? And we see any questions in the room, so we're on. Oh, we do have a question, okay.
Just checking, so it looks like, we should anticipate inflationary cost for a couple of these as well.
We will be having agendas coming in the coming board meeting, like amendment or funding.
The kids are here.
Awesome.
That's why we're doing it right there. All right, any other questions? Seeing none. All right, that brings us to the action item for boat access.
Okay. Well, in follow-up, the Community Enhancement Grant Program is up to the Community Enhancement Grant Program's update. I'm pleased to present for board consideration a recommendation to award climate access and resource funding for the Central Harbor Park and Boat Launch Facility Upgrade Implementation Project to the City of Pittsburgh. This item can be found on pages 43 through 46 of your agenda packet. This is the implementation phase of the project. The planning has been completed through a previous Conservancy grant. Conservancy staff recommends that the board approve up to $3,544,395 in grant funding for this proposal. The purpose and goals of which are to increase community access to the traditional waterfront and Delta, provide economic and tourism benefits in the Delta, and provide environmental, historical, and sustainable Delta education. The project will achieve this by upgrading the parking lot, paths of travel, shade structure, installing a vandal and break-in proof restrooms, enhancing facility lighting, installing of educational signage, a public safety substation, landscaping to prevent erosion, shade trees, public fire pits, leasable event space, a fish cleaning station, and a boat launch approach, which will not include work on the water. The goals of climate access and resource funding are to fund projects that promote climate resilience, community access, or natural resource protection activities. As a community access project, the Central Harbor Park and Boat Launch Facility Upgrade project meets this criteria. This project is considered a project under CEQA, and the City of Pittsburgh has filed a notice of exemption. The City of Pittsburgh will complete a revised NOE to represent the revised project description due to removing some project elements from the original scope. Since they are filing an NOE, no additional board action will be required. Additionally, this project is located in a severely disadvantaged community and is expected to support the community through increased economic activity, tourism, and increased access to the Delta. And again, the previous phase of the project was funded by the Conservancy. Lastly, the city of Pittsburgh will contribute cost share in the amount of $246,718 through cash and in-kind services. A breakdown of the in-kind costs can be found on the table in the board report. They also completed community outreach in the development of the project during the planning. Our staff is suggested motion language at the bottom of the agenda item for your consideration. Well, before we proceed, I'm happy to take any comments or questions.
Yeah, so I think it's a good project and has many beneficial aspects, particularly for the Delta region. But how does it promote climate resilience?
Do you want to take this question? Sure. So there's a couple of elements in the project as well as I'm Sarah Belafonte. I'm the assistant to the city manager for the city of Pittsburgh. I manage the environmental services division, and this is my colleague Danae. Danae is an analyst in our environmental services division. Background, she started in December and she wrote this grant by February. So super excited to have her with us. So the climate resiliency pieces are twofold, and actually Maya worked with us quite a bit on this, and it's one of the reasons for the update to our CEQA filing. So the infrastructure there, like the fire pits, the restrooms, the police substation, and those items are going to be raised to make sure that as sea level rise continues, those items are not necessarily affected. However, kind of going big picture here, waterfront resiliency is and climate resiliency on our waterfront is a big item that Pittsburgh's trying to tackle at the moment. We've had conversations with Congressman Garamendi and his group about different resiliency projects along the waterfront, especially given the storms that just came through and the damage that we experienced. So ensuring that the coastline around the project area is resilient to the climate change and all those kinds of things is a separate project that's going on, not with this funding and not really included in the description of this funding. Making sure that, again, we have the resiliency there. Also, the educational signage that's going to go along kind of the updated walking path is definitely going to include information for along those lines as well, for people to kind of learn up on it.
Yes.
Want to acknowledge Pittsburgh. They lean in on this kind of thing, and for years before I even got into elected office, they were working on Delta education. You were seeing this kind of activity along the marina constantly because they were leaning in on this. And so I just want to compliment activities from a lot of cities as much as Pittsburgh has, and looking for the resources, trying to preserve the Delta, teach about the Delta, and be ready for climate change, sea level rise, and also serving a vulnerable community. So when it's time, I'd like to make the motion.
If I may also add that under the funding, the legislation that created the funding, it's for climate access and restoration. So it's actually not just for climate resiliency.
All right. Don't see any more questions on. I can't see it.
Yes.
All right.
It's way over here.
Way over there. All right. Yeah. You're on, sir. Supervisor Pimenta?
Oh, yes, I didn't know you had called me. Thank you. I really support the project. I think it's one of the best to come before us. I just had one question. How much would this leave in this funding for other projects if we were to make this allocation today?
About 500,000.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Oh, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Do you want me to read it? Do you want me to-
Oh, yes, ma'am. please.
I have it right here. Do you want me to read it? Okay. I move to award funding of up to $3,544,395 to the city of Pittsburgh from the Climate Access and Resource Grant Program for the Central Harbor Park and Boat Launch Facility Upgrade Implementation Project.
You have a second?
We have a second?
Second.
Couple of them over there.
Well, we'll
You
do
pick.
winter net.
That Burgess is here comment earlier. See how you are.
I didn't say that. Okay, Mr. Roll Call. Chair Mashburn,
Aye.
Vice Chair Matsumoto,
Yes.
Supervisor Hume,
Aye.
and Supervisor Burgess.
Yes.
Supervisor Ding is absent. Supervisor Provenda,
Yes.
Board Member Pearl. Board Member Martin. Aye. And Board Member Winternet.
Yes.
8 ayes, the motion carries.
At this time, I'd like to invite Sarah Belafrente back up from the city of Pittsburgh, if you would.
We really appreciate the funding and very, very excited to bring this project forward, especially seeing it full circle from a Prop 68 planning grant all the way to here. The project was brought forward honestly by the community, which is, a unique kind of genesis. The community loves this park. We've got two very different communities surrounding the park. One and an SDAC and another community with personal boats in their backyard. So it's going to be really cool to be able to mesh these communities at this park that's very well loved and very frequented. So happy to bring kind of these educational elements, these elevated elements in an area where, I mean, we've got a proposed boutique hotel right down the street. We've got a fish market, a restaurant that have both survived an entire pandemic, which for small businesses at the corner of town is a big deal. So the quality of commercial entities that are coming in there, the group of people that this park gets to serve, and the infrastructure upgrades and the ode to our larger resiliency project is very exciting. We're going to transform this area. Thank you.
I'd like to say something if I may. I started the city of Pittsburgh in December, and I'm third generation born and raised in Pittsburgh. So this being the first grant, writing this first grant has been a great opportunity for me. It's in a community that means a lot to me. I'm a granddaughter of a fisherman, as a Sarah. I think our grandpas must have fished or hunted, and we didn't know this. And so I know, and he passed away 2 years ago, so I know this means a lot to him. I'm a young family who spends time on the Delta, so this was a great opportunity to be giving this grant writing job to as my first assignment. So I thank you guys all for the opportunity.
Right, I'm not seeing anything else. So that brings us to the 10, which is the consideration of award of nature-based solutions, wetland restoration grant funds, wetland mosaic landscape on the Webb Tract project.
So I'm going to start this one and then I'll turn it over to Lauren very quickly because this is the big one for today. This is a interesting project. Look forward to presenting it to the board and getting your consideration. I just wanted to note that we did amend the staff report. This was put out just very quickly. In conversation, we had sort of overstated Metropolitan Water District's board position on future land ownership, and they had not considered actually taking that issue up officially. So Metropolitan asked us appropriate to remove that paragraph, and that as well was removed from the staff report, the amended report that you received. I just wanted to make sure that was clear and certainly entertain questions about that. So with that, I will turn it over to Lauren.
Good morning. My name is Lauren Damon, and I'm the Ecosystem Restoration and Climate Adaptation Program Supervisor. I'm pleased to present for board consideration agenda item 10 today, a recommendation to award the first nature-based solutions wetland restoration funding project. The project is located in Contra Costa County, and it is a wetland mosaic landscape on Webb Tract, requested by the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. This item can be found on pages 47 to 52 of your agenda packet.
Conservancy staff recommends that the board approve up to $20,907,371 in grant funding for this proposal, dispersed into 2 phases, as outlined in the table on page 49 of your agenda packet. The proposed project seeks to restore about 5,000 acres into a mosaic of wetlands, rice, and other habitats such as grasslands or willow scrub to be determined. This is all to be determined during the planning process. The project will cover the entirety of Webb Tract, and the primary goals of the project are to halt organic soil subsidence and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Currently, the Delta has over 150,000 acres of deeply subsided islands that are a contributor to climate change and pose flooding risks to communities and agricultural land within the Delta. Each year, the islands continue to oxidize and subside, resulting in increased risk for climate change and flooding. This project will achieve its goals by re-wetting the landscape and converting current pasture into restored wetlands and rice crops, both of which have been extensively studied as methods to stop subsidence, accrete soil, and halt greenhouse gas emissions from areas with highly organic peat soils. This is a 2-phase project, including both planning and implementation, with CEQA compliance currently ongoing and to be completed prior to disbursement of implementation funds. Planning for this project is already underway. Phase 1 will include finalization of environmental documentation by Metropolitan's board and an authorization to proceed by the Delta Conservancy board. Metropolitan will begin phase 2, which includes construction. Monitoring of greenhouse gas emissions will occur both prior to and after construction for the length of the entire grant term. Monitoring will determine net climate benefits of the project and also allow the applicant to sell carbon credits on the voluntary carbon market. Successful completion of this project will serve as a showcase for other landowners, demonstrating rice and wetlands as mutually beneficial alternatives to the current agricultural practices. Since publishing the agenda packet, Metropolitan's cost share has changed due to the inclusion of their indirect rate. The updated cost share is now $4,394,687, which is 17% of the total project cost. Additionally, Metropolitan has been engaging the community through the Delta Islands adaptations process and recently has begun initial studies as the CEQA lead agency to ensure timely completion of environmental compliance. Since writing of the staff report in your agenda packet, we have also received additional letters provided from the local community, including a variety of landowners, reclamation and water districts, tribal consultants, plus agricultural and environmental organizations. Given the extensive outreach, careful planning, and environmental benefits, staff are recommending this project for board approval. There is suggested motion language at the bottom of your agenda item for your consideration, but before we proceed, I'm happy to take any comments or questions.
I did have some comments and questions, and I shared those already with Campbell when we initiated this. I just want to make sure that there is not a possibility that down the road, any portion of this project is utilized as mitigation for a Delta tunnel. And I want to make sure that there's language in there to make sure that happens. Or as a land bank for mitigations that can possibly be sold off for the Delta tunnel. I don't think the Conservancy should be for that particular project into the future. And then I also have concerns. I wanted to make sure that the county is in some way made whole. When you're taking that much active farmland out of production, you're affecting the economic base in that county. I know in our county, I'll just use it as an example, agriculture is a $1.6 billion economic driver in my county. You take 5,000 acres of that out of production, you're going to affect the bottom line for the county. You also affect the bottom line with regard to property tax. In my county, in some instances when that happens, the state or the utility will pay in lieu to the county for coverage of what they lose in those taxes. Because there's an impact to those citizens in the county, not just those landowners themselves. And so I would like to make sure there's some type of assurance that the county or the taxing entity there who's going to be facing a loss is somehow made whole, whether it's addressed to the EIR or some other part of the process. But those are my concerns. Not really a question, just voicing some concerns. I want to make sure that from the perspective of the Conservancy, from a legal standpoint, that those things are covered in this grant.
I think we can say confidently that they will be, and they will certainly be addressed through the planning process, and we'll make sure that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir.
I just want to say I had the exact same question relative to future mitigation, and I was assured by staff that that is not a possibility. So I feel confident in that determination. What is the source of the grant funding? Where are these monies?
This is the nature-based solution package funding that we received $36 million for this purpose. General fund that has a fairly short fuse to be able to obligate it all by June 2025.
Okay, and so the fact that we're spending a significant chunk of that money, this is a reasonable use because of the short timeline?
It is, I think, and it's, you know, it helps move that money quickly, helps justify more money in the future, helps show that we can actually step up the pace and scale of restoration that we need to achieve statewide objectives for biodiversity and nature-based solutions and natural working land. So I think it all comes together quite nicely.
Okay. And then I want to say I had the same concerns relative to economic output, and I was assured by staff that the current use for this land is primarily grazing, which is a low per acre output. And putting it into rice, actually, even though the total acreage in production will be less, the economic output is more. And so I think that's a fair trade-off, but I'm just curious, in the Erica program update, I think was the Nature Conservancy was looking for putting 5,000 acres into rice within the Delta. Does this acreage count towards that goal, or are we looking at taking more land out into a different production?
Those 5,000 acres are in addition to this project.
Okay, and is there a reason why that is, or?
So that's generally the focus here is, this is in the deeply subsided area of the Delta.
Yeah.
Where dry agriculture is really causing the oxidation and the continued subsidence. To stop that, any sort of polluticulture, which is wet agriculture that you can do, stops subsidence, stops the carbon emissions.
Yeah.
And in most cases, rice is a higher value commodity than what's being grown in these deeply subsided areas. So we're looking at it as a way to keep agriculture viable and actually increase the economic value, but also really focus on stopping the subsidence in the carbon emissions. So yes, it is additive to, these two projects are additive.
Okay.
And actually, I mean, I think probably one of the best things we could do in the Delta would be to take that 150,000 acres, as much of it as we could, and get it back underwater, because it reduces the risk to those communities, that agriculture, state's water supply, and stops us going the wrong direction.
And I certainly appreciate all the justifications and science, database reasoning and everything that's behind it. I'm just curious, was the 5,000 acres, is that just a spitball number, or is that based on if we can do which of the polluticulture to this level we were achieving?
So that number, that hopefully we'll be considering that proposal in July. We'll have a little more information, but basically there's been a lot of effort in the last several years, even from the big rice producers, Archer Daniel Mills and Farmers Rice Co-op, focusing on the potential of the Delta as a place to put rice, because a lot of rice is coming out of the upper valley, mostly due to drought concerns and scarcity of water.
Sure.
But also because there are varietals now that will grow in the Delta, and there's starting to be infrastructure. So you're seeing this groundswell. The Nature Conservancy has been working they've been doing this on their island. They're going to 4,000 acres on Staten Island of rice. They're about a little over 1,000 acres now. And they have been working with surrounding farmers, educating them in the deeply subsided area. And they have 3 or 4 that are ready to say yes, but for the cost of conversion, we would be interested in this. And then they expect to do outreach to other landowners in the deep bowl to see if they can get more people. And so 5,000 acres is sort of an early target to see if we can meet that target. I think the indications are that it's pretty likely.
Well, it all makes sense, right? I mean, we're getting better economic output out of the land on a per acre basis. We're using water where the water is, and there's an environmental benefit to boot. So I just want to know if there was, math that I could track. Thank you.
Just in response to your question, Chairman Ashburn, Nicole Ricky, your legal counsel, I don't know that there is, I just wanted to be clear. It sounds like staff addressed your concern about the loss of economic value for the local jurisdiction based on the conversion of less economically yielding use now to a higher yielding economic use. As a legal matter, I don't know that these funds can be used to reimburse the local jurisdiction via taxes. So I wasn't sure if that's what you were referring to. Okay, great.
Sir.
Bruce Washington, the Delta Protection Commission. Anytime I hear a conversation about displacing agricultural operations, I'm probably going to speak up. And this is extremely important. When you look at, well, it's just cattle ranching, it's not that big of a deal. Okay, so where are they going to? We have a shortage of pasture in the state of California. We have a lot of it's burned up in the hills. It's tough to find places to graze. So when I see this, I kind of go, okay, so what are we doing to make sure that they're okay as well? And I think that's something we've got to be looking at is how do we make those folks whole and able to displace? In terms of giving a little more production in rice, that's part of the landscape. That's not all the landscape, a lot of it's wetlands too. And that needs to be addressed. There is going to be a loss of agricultural production. And I think as we look at this too, as you have a more flooded landscape, you're increasing the consumptive use of water significantly. That's something that's not really getting addressed in this. So I think we need to really be looking at that analysis of what is going to be the consumptive use of water on the landscape.
If I could address that, I think it is absolutely accurate to say that there is an increase of consumptive use. Actually, sorry. Consumptive use is virtually the same because it's the evapotranspiration of the plant species that cover. You have some increase of evaporation because you have standing water, but it's also well shaded. So there is absolutely an increase of applied water, but that's important, but it's not a tremendous amount of additional water for this purpose. And to stop the subsidence and reduce the risk, I think that's kind of the balance that we're trying to support moving forward. The carbon value of the wetlands can come close to replacing the agricultural value of the crops that are being displaced. Technically, it's not agriculture, and that's not, it's not agriculture, it doesn't replace the landowner's carbon. And then, so.
I appreciate all the comments. I've got a lot of feedback from a lot of people on the issue, so I'm not going to repeat everything. There was a lot of concern related to the mitigation issue. I think in general, the Conservancy should have a policy that, not that we're making adjustments to make up for the loss of income in any county, but that we are making that a consideration that when people are bringing us proposals. Contra Costa County provided a support letter for phase one, and I know you said that there were a lot of support letters. I don't know if there's a distinguish between phase two and phase one, letters of support. I know that there are other projects that are going on that would have liked to have been able to apply for that phase two money. And I know that from my discussions with Campbell, it was the scope of the project being so big and having an ability to meet certain goals that these smaller projects wouldn't have. But I do have a concern. I know that you said June of 25, right? And as someone that wrote grants, that worked on projects, matter of fact, ones that will be visited today, I know people have things that are on the ground ready to go. And when we talk about the high cost of projects, having to, add a little bit to these projects, and also knowing that we're seeing a decrease in our budget in the state level, what kind of money are we going to be able to see in the future? I have concerns about committing such a large amount of money to phase two, and I've communicated it, and I say it with all due respect, and I don't know what I don't know, so I'm just saying it with as much respect and honor as I can. I do have a concern about committing so much money to a project when we don't even have the project yet completed. So those are my concerns, but I really do, acknowledge Metropolitan for doing, working with the Conservancy and, so those are.
All right, Supervisor Prevent, it looked like you have your hand up, sir.
Yes, thank you. A couple questions, then a comment. The issue of the mitigation for the tunnels, I'm not sure I understood the answer on that.
And essentially, we're, with our public money, we can't pay for anyone else's mitigation requirement. I mean, that's a firewall across all of our projects.
Okay.
If you have a mitigation requirement, you are on the hook to cover the cost and achieve that mitigation. So we simply have a strong firewall there.
Okay.
I believe that's already, Jim, I believe that's already required by statute. I'd have to confirm that. But it's certainly something that can be reiterated in the grant.
Okay, appreciate that.
Jim?
Second, I had a question about the phase, the two phases. Don't we normally just fund the initial work and then come back for a second grant on the implementation? I'm wondering why those are being combined here.
Yes, that is our standard practice. It's really sort of twofold. Again, this is a $36 million allocation that is general fund. So unlike Proposition 1, which was passed in 2014, and we've run 5 open solicitations through the course of several years, and we're still paying out on those grants. This money has to be expended by 2027. And so these are large, complex projects. I mean, if you look at some of the historic projects, wetland projects in the Delta, they take many, many years to move forward. So we're trying to compress the obligation process, locking the funding for the project, as well as the timeline to design and implement as quickly as possible. So we make sure that we can spend these monies on this purpose. And I think going to your concern earlier, we really have, these projects are big and they're complex. We have 3 projects that are really eligible for this funding that are sort of in the hopper right now. Between those 3, we could fund this one, the next large one, and at least the planning for the 3rd. And then we're working with the Wildlife Conservation Board and foundation funders to see if we can get a 3-way funding for the other project. So those are really the 3 projects that are on the horizon that would have the ability to spend this magnitude of funding in this short a period of time as dictated by the source of the funding.
And just another comment, Jim, the board will have full discretion prior to the implementation funding being let go for the project. You will have full discretion at that point to approve or deny the implementation project.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate those answers, and I do support this. I think that addressing climate is one of the things that we said we're going to do, and the subsidence of the island of the islands in the Delta is a huge contributor to carbon. And looking at the bigger picture, agriculture, our communities, everything we do is affected by climate, and I think this is an important project to go forward. So I'm in favor.
Mr. Chair, sir, comment. So I appreciate all the concerns I've heard here. And I agree with them. They're legitimate been addressed, and some are more difficult to address than others. But I do want to point out a couple of things. Number one, the island continues to subside. So that is not in the interest of anybody. It has to be corrected. And when you take a drastic step, then changes are made. To Jim, your point, the climate resilience is very important here. The sea levels are rising. We have to find ways to steady the Delta lands. As to other projects, smaller projects that may come in for funding in the future, sure, that's good. I hope that they do. In terms of ecological value, though, I want to point out that it's been shown that doing postage size restorations through different areas does not have the value of doing larger restoration areas where the land is combined, where the ecological processes can work. And that's why I feel that this project in itself, 3,000, 4,000 acres of wetlands is so important, because it allows for that large contiguous piece of land to work ecologically as they do, rather than just postage stamp size. So I just wanted to point that out. That's part of my reason for support for this. Yes, ma'am.
So one of my concerns about rice is that a lot of our farmers like to rotate crops. And it seems like there's really just two things right now that work for subsidence, tules, I always say that, tules, and rice. And I really have, as a member of the Delta Chair of the Delta Protection Commission, and a member of the Delta Stewardship Council and the Conservancy, I really want to encourage the idea that we help fund the research to find other crops. I know because it's the way it's watered and all of that, there's limitations, but I'm wanting to think in the big picture scheme of things. And the other comment I had is I've seen the goalpost change in law. And so certain assumptions that we make related to mitigation and those protections, is there any type of legal legislative approach that could change that goalpost, that we make that assumption that things are safe?
What respect?
The answer to people's concerns related to mitigation was that we have this firewall, I think is what you call it. Is there a way that the law or legislature could change that firewall? Since there's been other things happening that could, change those firewalls.
The stroke of a pen or a vote on any given Tuesday, right, is what she's saying.
Yeah, right. My instinct, not having researched it, my instinct would be that that could be prospective, but I don't know that it could be back-looking, because you as a board approved it under existing conditions at that time. So I'm not sure that the legislature can change that. I have to research it, but that's my instinct.
And so if we did a motion, maybe adding that as a part of it would make it a little bit more of a firewall.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's already in law, but if you wanted to include it expressly in the grant agreement, which it may already be a provision, I'm not sure, but if you wanted to articulate in your motion that should be a condition, I think you could absolutely do that, and that might help if the legislature were to change its position.
Yes.
Couple of comments. One is that, like, I think that the scale of this is really exciting. I'm kind of struggling with it because it does then take, in order to get to scale, it takes a big entity and a big landowner to do that type of a project. And so I'm just kind of naming that tension of wanting to invest in local community capacity to do projects through our programs, and that we're through this trying to move quickly, do something at scale in a position that we're putting a whole bunch of money in a big entity that's based in Southern California. So that's just, it is what it is, but I wanted to just call that out because I think it is attention. I think it's a great project, but that's the way those criteria are kind of creating a I don't know how else to name it. There's a tension there. So, but it's an important project and an important place to get done quickly. I think it's exciting that we're getting it done this quickly. Like if Metropolitan is committing to move this in a couple of years, that is really exciting. That kind of scale of impact quickly is really something to habitat today and reducing subsidence today is worth a lot more than this project happening 5-10 years from now. So that there's a tremendous value through that. The other thing here is I do hope the Conservancy thinks about funding these types of projects, planning and implementation together, just because I come from the nonprofit world, and when you have a funding kind of guarantee that's multi-year over multiple phases, one, it reduces the number of times and the capacity that they're spending writing the grants themselves, right? Because it's one step instead of two or multiple steps. It reduces the uncertainty through that process. So it then allows the organization to fund positions. And so when you have to do a planning grant and then wait a year while you write your next grant, with the uncertainty in funding staff in that time and then getting the next grant, that's harder to absorb. So I think that this model of kind of thinking about ways that we can creatively do that to help capacity build is important. And I hope we can do it for smaller organizations and organizations based on the Delta.
I really appreciate you mentioning that, because I think I mentioned that the purpose of doing that was two phases. I only explained one of the phases, but that was the other reason. I mean, even for staff, it's one process, one review process, one grant to manage through time. So there's just efficiencies in that regard too. And the money is not released until planning is effectively done and the board approves moving on to that next phase.
Yes.
So just to comment on what Sandy and others have mentioned about equitable access to state funds, the Conservancy staff, myself included, and our Deputy Executive Officer, Karen Burr, we're working with CNRA agency on operationalizing equity. And part of that is reconsidering our grant guidelines and how we plan for our funds, but disperse our funds as well. So it's not always, large organizations who can act quickly come into apply for state funds, but maybe setting aside small portions or a portion of that funds for smaller groups who may take a little bit more time or need more technical assistance in applying for funds. Karen and I are having those discussions. We'll talk about it with Campbell and then also bring it before you all if we were to make those changes to our policies and procedures of how we roll out our funds. So it's definitely a concern and conversations we're having internally and we take seriously.
Is there any public comment?
I'm looking right now to see if there's any hands raised up there.
No hands raised.
No hands raised. Particular subject. We haven't had yet. I don't see any.
Chair, I would move to award funding up to $3,221,199 for the planning phase and move to conditionally award $17,686,172 for the implementation phase, subject to further review and approval by the Conservancy Board to Metropolitan Water District of Southern California from the Nature-Based Solutions Wetland Restoration Grant Program for the Wetland Mosaic Landscape on Webb Tract project.
Can I add that extra?
Do you want to phrase it real quick?
Can I get some advice on the best way to?
With the added condition that the funds that are being released in the project will not in any way be used for mitigation for the lack of a better word at the moment, the Delta Tunnels project. That condition will be added to the grant agreement.
As amended.
I second that motion.
Motion and a second. Give it a roll call.
Back to you.
With the added clarification that the funds are being released and not used for mitigation. You know what? I'll just read it out later. Chair Mastrom.
Aye.
Vice Chair Matsumoto.
Yes.
Supervisor Hume.
Aye.
Supervisor Burgess.
Yes.
Supervisor.
I couldn't hear. Were you calling me?
I was.
Aye. Yes.
Board Member Pearl.
Aye.
And Board Member Martin.
Aye.
And Board Member Witterman.
Yes.
The motion carries with 8 ayes.
All right.
At this time, I'd like to invite Randall Nudek, if you want to say a couple words, you can sit here or stand.
I guess I can stand here, Chair Masper and members of the board. We want to, on behalf of the Metropolitan Water District Board and our management, we want to not only thank you for approving the grant, but your leadership in this effort, which we believe will be a landmark project in the Delta. We want to continue working with you as a partner on this and continue our collaborative outreach with Delta interests, both regional and local. That includes the local landowners, environmental interests, environmental justice, counties, and tribals and tribal interests and others. So we look forward. We think this is a great project, one that not only enhances the ecosystem, restore or stop some of the subsidence, supports sustainable agriculture, and promotes carbon sequestration in the Delta. We want to thank Campbell Ingram and Lauren and other members of the staff, Angie, and we want to continue working with them on this project and look forward to moving forward with it.
Thank you, sir. All right, that brings us to potential agenda items.
Great. So our next board meeting will be July 26th. A reminder, it will be a hybrid meeting, but if you are a board member, please remember that we'll have to notice where you're coming to us from. It is July, so we will do our board elections. We do board elections for chair and vice chair every July. We also typically in July do our implementation plan update. So if you recall, in March, we provided the implementation plan for this year. So it's just a check-in. We'll do a quick review of where we are relative to that. We likely will have some community enhancement grant program amendments to consider that we'll bring forward. And then also we mentioned the nature-based solutions project that might be coming in July as well. One thing I captured earlier, and I think it would be good to get an overview of the nutria dog detection project. So that's kind of what we have in our thinking for the July meeting. Any suggestions or other things folks would be interested in hearing about or learning about, we're happy to entertain that. And we will resume our standard updates for the DPC, Stewardship Council, Delta Conveyance, and Eco Restore. Great. Well, thank you very much.
Jim, there's nothing to add up. We're all right. All right. Well, that brings us to public comment. One more opportunity for the public out there in internet land or in the room here.
Nothing in the chat.
All right. Well, that brings us to adjournment then. Thank you all very much.